Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I'm reading from the Inimitable Jeeves, a collection of short stories written by P.G. Wodehouse in 1923. In them, Jeeves, a valet, and his employer Bertie Wooster are all characters in dozens of little vignettes. The stories are all told from the point of view of Bertie. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. This is part 2 of The Purity of the Turf. Betting was heavy on a series of races at a village fair. Bertie and friends are backing Harold the choir boy and making sure he doesn't get into any trouble. Tonight they will be watching him at choir practice. There's something about evening service in a country church that makes a fellow feel drowsy and peaceful. Sort of end of a perfect day feeling. Old Heppenstall was up in the pulpit, and he has a kind of regular bleating delivery that assists thought. They had left the door open, and the air was full of a mixed scent of trees and honeysuckles and mildew and villagers' Sunday clothes. As far as the eye could reach, you could see farmers propped up in restful attitudes, breathing heavily, and the children in the congregation who had fidgeted during the earlier part of the proceedings were now lying back in a surfeited sort of coma. The last rays of the setting sun shone through the stained-glass windows. Birds were twittering in the trees. The women's dresses were crackled gently in the stillness. Peaceful, that's what I'm driving at. I felt peaceful. Everybody felt peaceful. And that's why the explosion when it came sounded like the end of all things. I call it an explosion because that's what it seemed like when it broke loose. One moment a dreamy hush was all over the place, and broken only by old Heppenstall talking about our duty to our neighbors, and then suddenly a sort of piercing, shrieking squeal that got you right between the eyes and ran all the way down your spine and out of the soles of the feet. Yee! Oh! Yee! Sounded like about 600 pigs having their tails twisted simultaneously, but it was simply the kid Harold, who appeared to be having some species of fit. He was jumping up and down and slapping at the back of his neck, and about every other second he would take a deep breath and give out another of the squeals. Well, you can't do that sort of thing in the middle of the sermon during evening service without exciting remark. The congregation came out of its trance with a jerk and climbed on the pews to get a better view. Old Heppenstall stopped in the middle of a sentence and spun around, and a couple of vergers with great presence of mind bounded up the aisle like leopards, collected Harold, still squealing, and marched him out. They disappeared into the vestry, and I grabbed my hat and legged it round to the stage door, full of apprehension and whatnot. I couldn't think what the deuce could have happened, but somewhere dimly behind the proceedings there seemed to me to lurk the hand of the blighter Steggles. By the time I got there and managed to get someone to open the door, which was locked, the service seemed to be over. Old Heppenstall was standing in the middle of a crowd of choir boys and vergers and sextons and whatnot, and putting the wretched Harold through it with no little vim. I had come in at the tail end of what must have been a fairly fruity oration. "Wretched boy, how dare you? I got sensitive skin. This is no time to be talking about your skin. Somebody put a beetle down my back. Absurd. I felt it wriggling. Nonsense. Sounds pretty thin, doesn't it?" said someone at my side. It was Steggles, dash him, clad in a snowy surplice or cassock, or whatever they call it. Wearing an expression of grave concern, the blighter had the cold, cynical crust to look at me in the eyeball without a blink. "Did you put a beetle down his neck?" I cried. "Me," said Steggles. "Me?" Old Heppenstall was putting on the black cap. "I do not credit a word of your story, wretched boy. I have warned you before, and now the time has come to act. You cease from this moment to be a member of my choir. Go, miserable child." Steggles plucked at my sleeve. "In that case," he said, "those bets, I'm afraid you'll lose your money, dear boy. It's a pity you didn't put it on starting price. I always think SP's the only safe way." I gave him one look. Not a bit good, of course. "They talk about the purity of the turf," I said. And I meant it to sting, by Jove. Jeeves received the news bravely, but I think the man was a bit rattled beneath the service. "Man and genius, young gentleman, Mr. Steggles, sir." "Bally swindler, you mean?" Perhaps that would be a more exact description. However, these things will happen on the turf, and it is useless to complain. I wish I had your sunny disposition, Jeeves. Jeeves bowed. "We now rely, then, it would seem, sir, almost entirely on Mrs. Penworthy. Should she justify Mr. Little's encomiums and show real class in the mother's sack race, our gains will just balance our losses." "Well, yes, but that's not much consolation when you've been looking forward to a big win." "It is possible that we may still find ourselves on the right side of the ledger after all, sir. Before Mr. Little left, I persuaded him to invest a small sum for the syndicate, of which you were kind enough to make me a member, sir, on the girls' egg and spoon race." "On Sarah Mills?" "No, sir. On a long-priced outsider. Little Prudence Baxter, sir, the child of his lordship's head gardener. Her father assures me she has a very steady hand. She is accustomed to bring him his mug of beer from the cottage each afternoon, and he informs me that she has never spilled a drop." "Well, that sounded as though young Prudence's control was good, but how about speed? With seasoned performers like Sarah Mills entered, the thing practically amounted to a classical race, and these big events you must have speed." "I am aware that it is what is termed a long shot, sir. Still, I thought it judicious." "You backed her for a place, too, then, of course?" "Yes, sir, each way." "Well, I suppose it's all right. I've never known you to make a bloomer yet." "Thank you very much, sir." "I'm bound to say, as a general rule, my idea of a large afternoon would be to keep as far away from a village school treat as possible. A sticky business. But with such grave issues toward, if you know what I mean, I sank my prejudices on this occasion and rolled up. I found the proceedings about as scaly as I had expected. It was a warm day, and the hall grounds were a dense, practically liquid mass of peasantry. Kids seethed to and fro. One of them, a small girl of sorts, grabbed my hand and hung on to it, and I clove my way through the jam to where the mother's sack race was to finish. We hadn't been introduced, but she seemed to think I would do as well as anyone else to talk about the rag doll she'd won in the lucky dip, and she rather spread herself on the topic. "I'm going to call it Gertrude," she said, "and I shall undress it every night and put it to bed, and wake it up in the morning and dress it, and put it to bed at night, and wake it up next morning and dress it." "I say, old thing," I said, "I don't want to hurry you and all that, but you couldn't condense it a bit, could you? I'm rather anxious to see the finish of this race. The Wooster fortunes are by way of hanging on it." "I'm going to run in a race soon," she said, shelving the doll for the nonce and descending to ordinary chit-chat. "Yes," I said, distrait, if you know what I mean, and trying to peer through the chinks of the crowd. What race is that?" "Egg and spoon." "No, really? Are you Sarah Mills?" "Now," registering scorn, "I'm Prudence Baxter." Well, naturally, this put our relations on a different footing. I gazed at her with considerable interest. One of the stable. I must say she didn't look much of a flyer. She was short and round, bit out of condition, I thought. "I say," I said, "that being so, you mustn't dash about in the hot sun and take the edge off yourself. You must conserve your energies, old friend. Sit down here in the shade." "Don't want to sit down." "Well, take it easy anyhow." The kid flitted to another topic, like a butterfly hovering from flower to flower. "I'm a good girl," she said. "Oh, I bet you are. I hope you're a good egg and spoon racer, too." "Harold's a bad boy. Harold squealed in church and isn't allowed to come to the treat. I'm glad," continued this ornament of her sex, wrinkling her nose virtuously, "because he's a bad boy. He pulled my hair on Friday. Harold isn't coming to the treat. Harold isn't coming to the treat. Harold isn't coming to the treat," she chanted, making a regular song of it. "Don't rub it in, my dear old gardener's daughter," I pleaded. "You don't know it, but you've hit on rather a painful subject." Just then Heppenstall walked up. Ah, Wooster, my dear friend, so you made friends with this little lady. He was beaming profusely, life and soul of the party. I am delighted, my dear Wooster, he went on, quite delighted at the way you young men are throwing yourselves into the spirit of this little festivity of ours. Oh, yes, I said. Oh, yes, even Rupert Steggles. I must confess that my opinion of Rupert Steggles had materially altered for the better this afternoon. Well, mine hadn't, but I didn't say so. I always considered Rupert Steggles, between ourselves, a rather self-centered youth, by no means the kind who would put himself out to further the enjoyment of his fellows. And yet twice within the last half hour I observed him escorting Mrs. Pennyworthy, our worthy tobacconist's wife, to the refreshment tent. I left him standing. I shook off the clutching hand of the Baxter kid and haired it rapidly to the spot where the mother sack race was just finishing. I had a horrible presentiment that there had been more dirty work at the crossroads. The first person I ran into was young Bingo. I grabbed him by the arm. Who won? I don't know. I didn't notice. There was bitterness in the chappie's voice. Wasn't Mrs. Pennyworthy. Dash her. Bertie, that hound Steggles is nothing more or less than one of our leading snakes. I don't know how he heard about her, but he must have got onto it that she was dangerous. Do you know what he did? He lured that miserable woman into the refreshment tent 5 minutes before the race and brought her out so weighed down with cake and tea she blew up in the first 20 yards. Just rolled over and lay there. Well, thank goodness we still have Harold. I gaped at the poor chump. Harold? Haven't you heard? Heard? Bingo turned a delicate green. Heard what? I haven't heard anything. I only arrived 5 minutes ago. Came straight here from the station. What has happened? Tell me. I slipped him the information. He stared at me for a moment in a ghastly sort of way, then with a hollow groan tottered away and was lost in the crowd. Nasty knock, poor chap. I didn't blame him for being upset. They were clearing the decks now for the egg and spoon race, and I thought I might as well stay where I was and watch the finish. Not that I had much hope. Young Prudence was a good conversationalist, but she didn't seem to me to be the build for a winner. As far as I could see through the mob, they got off to a good start. A short red-haired child was making the running with a freckled blonde second, and Sarah Mills lying up an easy third. Our nominee was straggling along with the field well behind the leaders. It was not hard even as early as this to spot the winner. There was a grace, a practiced precision in the way Sarah Mills held her spoon that told its own story. She was cutting a good pace, but her egg didn't even wobble. A natural egg and spooner, if there ever was one. Class will tell. 30 yards from the tape, the red-haired kid tripped over her feet and shot her egg up onto the turf. Class will tell. 30 yards from the tape, the red-haired kid tripped over her feet and shot her egg onto the turf. The freckled blonde fought gamely, but she had run herself out halfway down the straight, and Sarah Mills came past and home on a tight rein by several lengths, a popular winner. The blonde was second. A sniffling female in blue gingham beat a pie-faced kid in pink for the place money, and Prudence Baxter Jeeves' long shot was either fifth or sixth. I couldn't see which. And then I was carried along with the crowd to where old Heppenstall was going to present the prizes. I found myself standing next to the man Steggles. "Hello, old chap," he said, very bright and cheery. "You've had a bad day, I'm afraid." I looked at him with silent scorn. Lost on the biter, of course. "It's not been a good meeting for any of the big punters," he went on. "Poor old Bingo Little went down badly over that egg and spoon race." I hadn't been meaning to chat with the fellow, but I was startled. "What do you mean badly?" I said. He only had a small bet on." "I don't know what you call small. He had 30 quid each way on the Baxter kid." The landscape reeled before me. "What?" 30 quid at 10 to 1. I thought he must have heard something. Apparently not. The race went by the form book all right. I was trying to do sums in my head. I was just in the middle of working out the syndicate's losses when old Heppenstall's voice came sort of faintly to me out of the distance. He had been pretty fatherly and debonair when laying out the prizes for the other events, but now he had suddenly grown all pained and grieved. He peered sorrowfully at the multitude. "With regard to the girls' egg and spoon race, which has just concluded," he said, "I have a painful duty to perform. Circumstances have arisen which it is impossible to ignore. It is not too much to say that I am stunned." He gave the populace about 5 seconds to wonder why he was stunned, and then went on. 3 years ago, as you are aware, I was compelled to expunge from the list of events at this annual festival the Father's Quarter Mile, owing to reports coming to my ears of wagers taken and given on the result at the village inn, and a strong suspicion that on at least one occasion the race had actually been sold by the speediest runner. That unfortunate occurrence shook my faith in human nature, I admit. But still, there was one event at least which I confidently expected to remain untainted by the miasma of professionalism. I allude to the girls' egg and spoon race. It seems, alas, that I was too sanguine. He stopped again and wrestled with his feelings. I will not weary you with the unpleasant details. I will merely say that before the race was run, a stranger in our midst, the manservant of one of the guests at the hall, I will not specify with more particularity, approached several of the competitors and presented each of them with 5 shillings on condition that they are finished. Belated sense of remorse has led him to confess to me what he did, but it's too late. The evil is accomplished, and retribution must take its course. It is no time for half measures. I must be firm. I rule that Sarah Mills, Jane Parker, Bessie Clay, and Rosie Jukes, the first 4 to pass the winning post, have forfeited their amateur status and are disqualified. Now this handsome bag work now, presented by Lord Wick Hammersley, goes, in consequence, to Prudence Baxter. Prudence, step forward. End of chapter. So Jeeves fixes the race, confesses. He had the foresight to bet heavily for the syndicate on a long shot, and so did Bingo. Stay tuned for the next episode in this series, Chapter 15, The Metropolitan Touch. Bingo will be in love again, this time with absolutely the right one. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. And check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. And remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.